Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan Mader.
But what's more impressive to me about the fact
Stoti.
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris Dowhouse.
Get him, Chase.
And Adam.
No,
LaRue.
not necessarily, but it's again the same.
Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
All right. We're back here with Operation Domination on a special time here on the Saturday morning. Thanks for getting up with us. Some of the hosts aren't up with us yet, but we'll get it going as we get through the show. We got AFC South to talk about. We are now at that pivotal halfway mark through our divisional profile series, talking about all the fantasy football assets and everything that goes along with it. We'll have that. We'll have showdowns. We'll have underdog specials for you guys later on in today's show. As always, I'm your host, Dan Mader. Make sure, if you have not done so, whether you're listening to us on your podcast platform, check us out on YouTube at FF Advice Network. Hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell notification button. That way you get notified with every new content available to you. Or if you watch us on YouTube, we're also available on podcasts. So when you're out there on the weekends, mowing the lawn, doing your job, whatever you got to do, take Operation Domination with you by downloading on your favorite podcast app. So like I said, we got the AFC South to talk about, and we do have a special guest. So let's get him properly introduced. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. He's the man, the myth, the legend, the two-time top 15 fantasy pros ranker and host of the Fantasy Football Face-Off, the one, the only, Mr. Anthony Stoti.
That was a great introduction. I wasn't expecting that.
I always love the look on the guest's face when they're blown away by it. That's the point. You should be blown away. We're blown away that you're here with us. Thanks for joining the show, man.
No, happy to be here. It's I like the mornings. I'm a morning person, so this is great for me.
Well, this is why we're doing it for you, buddy. And we're doing it for everybody else out there watching Operation Domination too. All right, so let's just get right into it. Again, like I said, AFC South, so we're starting off with the quarterbacks. And one of the top quarterbacks being talked about in this division is Anthony Richardson. Now, of course, he has the upside. We all know with the rushing, only played about 3.5 games, if that, last year. So Anthony, you have him ranked 5, which is the highest amongst this panel. So what do you got when it comes to Anthony Richardson?
This is all about a player I'm willing to take the risk on, because when we saw Anthony Richardson last year, he played 4 games, 2 of which he left in the second quarter. And one of those games he left in the second quarter, he still scored 17.7 fantasy points. In the 2 games where he played full games, he finished as a QB4 and a QB2 on a week. So small sample size. This is a high ceiling player. He's never played a single snap, I don't believe, with Jonathan Taylor. They just re-signed Pittman. They drafted Adonai Mitchell. They got Downs. Like, this is a loaded offense. And one of the more underrated talking points about the Colts is Stan Steichen, what he's managed to do with Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, even Gardner Minshew. He made Gardner Minshew look like a starting quarterback in the NFL, which he is not, in my opinion. But like, now we get Anthony Richardson. So I'll rank him possibly even higher, because I believe if we get a full season out of Anthony Richardson, he's going to break fantasy football.
I mean, he was on pace for 23 rushing touchdowns last year. Quarterback 4 on a point per game basis. Yeah, all the things you kind of laid out. So the potential is there because of that cheat code as a rusher. Now, Chris, not that you're super low on him, but you do have him at 10. So we're kind of going the other side on this thing. What are some cautions that you have about Anthony Richardson not ranking him in that elite tier?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at Anthony Richardson, you're dependent on one thing and one thing only, basically, is that he's going to rush for touchdowns. And the problem with that is that if he doesn't rush for touchdowns, then what else have you gotten? You got a guy who completed under 60% of his passes, a guy who has arm trouble already, which is always concerning for me when you hear about guys who have arm issues. We've seen Cam Newton's career go down. We saw Peyton Manning's career go down. We go on the list we saw last year where Deshaun Watson's arm issues in the beginning of the offseason was kind of like, oh, he'll be fine. And then what happened? Deshaun Watson was shut down for the season. So Anthony Richardson has a lot of red flags for me. A guy who only played 4 games, as you guys alluded to, didn't finish 2 of those games. And then on top of it, his explosiveness. I mean, he rushed for his long rush last year was 23 yards. So I go back to, you're looking for a guy who basically had averaged about 6 or 7 carries a game. Now it's hard to kind of project what he would do through the full game because he did keep leaving at injured. But when you look at a guy who has to get in the red end zone consistently with a full healthy Jonathan Taylor for an entire season, an offensive to add all his weapons, as Anthony alluded to, I have concerns Anthony Richardson isn't going to be a guy that I can necessarily have trust in, where there's a lot of other guys in that range that I have more faith in week in, week out. They're going to be healthy and consistent.
Yeah, I will say, Richardson, when it comes to the passing, right, there's a long way to go. His passing metrics, you could pick one out. It's going to be well below average no matter how you break it down. Small sample size. But that was the concern when he was coming out of Florida, was how good of a passer are you really going to be? I want to get the Colts fan perspective in here for this conversation real quick, because we heard the 2 conversations. Anthony's got him up in the top 5. Chris has got him more by 10. And I want to ask you from this question of, what do you think about Anthony Richardson? But also, if you're going to be drafting, is he worth drafting at that higher tier, knowing that there is depth at the position, seemingly on paper at least, going into this season? Adam.
Yeah, I think it's team build to team build, just kind of the way the board falls in the individual draft, because there's definitely ones where I get it, going with Anthony Richardson for that gamble being worth it, because he very well could end up as a QB, like the QB1. Like, that's within the range of outcomes. QB 30 is also within the range of outcomes. This is like a high risk, high reward gamble. So you better be prepared to get a solid QB2 if you're going with an Anthony Richardson, in my opinion. As far as he goes, Chris, I agree with a lot of your concerns. Anthony, I agree with a lot of, the upside there. The one concern that, to me, at least in the short term, I'll say I'm not overly worried about, is the arm. Now, if that pops back up as an injury, like, I think that's a real concern. And if that, shortens the career towards the end of this thing, that's a real concern. But everything I've seen, I'm not going to say like, him throwing on air, like accuracy wise, like you can't get any real gauge of that, but I can see like zip out of the hand on air. Like, that's something you can see and it looks normal, like well enough. So that's one that I'm not at least super concerned about in the short term. But, again, like, as an injury popping back up, totally. As an injury long-term, totally. I just think the zip is still there
Adam,
for now.
Real quick, are you concerned about the style of play, being altered or them being encouraged to be altered as a result of that as well, which is going to damage that opportunity for rushing touchdowns, especially in the red zone? Not
really. Shane Steichen, to me, has so far been a straight shooter. No, we don't have a super long sample size with him. He's been a head coach for, the one season. But he keeps going again and again. Like, he needs to be, maybe a little bit smarter about making those decisions, but I'm not going to tell him not to run, and we're still going to use his legs because that's why we drafted him. So at this juncture, Shane Steichen's given me no reason to doubt him when he says that, because he hasn't really, outright lied to my face before. Ballard has about like Taylor and whatnot last year, but Steichen never really, was jumping on that sword. So I still trust him in that regard.
Well, let's throw this out there, too. Shane Steichen's also responsible for the push-tush coming in to play here with Jalen Hurts being a weapon in the red zone. I don't think he's going to take that away when he has Anthony Richardson's skill set. Let's talk about another AFC South quarterback. This one made me look good for at least a year, because I got a lot of flack last year for saying CJ Stroud should be drafted as your number 1. I had him over Anthony Richardson, even in Dynasty rookie mock drafts, because I just thought he was going to be that good of a quarterback. So far, so good. Chase, you have him at the highest as far as a redraft goes going into 2024. You got him at 5. So what are you looking at? What do you like about CJ Stroud? Why do you think he avoids the sophomore slump?
Well, I think he's definitely a top 10 caliber quarterback for this season. 5 might be a little high. I might be riding a little bit of the CJ Stroud, wave that everybody's on right now. But
down is your ranking. Be confident in it.
But I am saying that, you're talking about a guy that in his rookie campaign was quarterback 9 overall, quarterback 9 on a points per game basis there and half PPR. The kids got it. Plus they went out and they got him Stephon Diggs. He's going to have a healthy Tank Dell. He's going to have Stephon Diggs as his number 1. Nico Collins is his number 2. Tank Dell is his number 3. And Dalton Schultz is still there. Also, they went out and they improved his run game by getting him Joe Mixon. This is a team that had a middle of the road, offensive line here. So, I mean, he's got an offense around him that there's no reason he can't repeat what he did last season. It wasn't like he shot the lights out and did something that's completely crazy in terms of his completion percentages or anything like that. In fact, I mean, he had one of the lower completion percentages in the top 12 of the lowest completion percentage in top 12 quarterbacks. I mean, so there's even room for improvement there. I think with a better run game this season, I expect them to be a better run game with Joe Mixon and to have a little bit more production there. They should be staying on the field more because they'll be getting more first downs. They'll be improved that way. I don't think there's any question that Joe Mixon is a step up from what Singletary and Pierce were giving them last season. So, I mean, just with everything around them, it's not hard to imagine some regression from Dak Prescott's MVP level, season last season. We've got questions about guys like, Jordan Love, my guy, Jordan Love. Can he repeat his performance from last season? So, I mean, there's enough there that you can say that he can make it to number 5 overall. Now, that being said, he's being drafted number 5 overall. I'm probably not going to have a ton of CJ Stroud at that price right now. Guys that went in similar range last season at the quarterback position, Justin Herbert and Justin Fields, the two Justins, and we all know what happened to them. Herbert ended up the season 17 overall. Fields ended up the season 18 overall. You could have got Dak Prescott several rounds later, being drafted as a quarterback 9. There you can wait on quarterback and still get value and still get commensurate value from what I think you're going to get from CJ Stroud. So I probably won't have a ton of him coming up this year, but 5 is probably his ceiling. And if you don't mind drafting at the ceiling, go ahead and take CJ Stroud. I think he's going to have a good year. The ADP is a little rich for what I want to do this year with my builds though.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point to bring up. Look, I just want to point this out here. CJ Stroud, great season last season, quarterback 11 on a points per game basis. He hit the 4,000-yard mark that you're looking for, but only 22 touchdowns. And that was in 15 games. His pace would have been 26 touchdowns. I've talked about this before. I'll bring it up every show. You got to hit, as a pocket passing quarterback, you got to hit 30 touchdowns in order to have a chance to be in that quarterback elite tier. Now, with the addition of Stephon Diggs, I think he's got a chance to be able to do that. Of course, the weapons are going to be surrounding him everywhere. But then, Chase, and this is going to be my question to Anthony, you kind of bring up a good point. I mean, going right behind him is Anthony Richardson at 6, Joe Burrow's at ADP 7, Jordan Love, Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy. I mean, those are the next 5 quarterbacks after that. And I don't know if I love CJ Stroud that much more than those guys. So what do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, I can see myself possibly knocking Stroud down another spot. I have him at 7 right now. And when you look at his finish last year, there were a few quarterbacks who had high quarterback finishes, but we also need to consider the number of quarterbacks who were injured and not accounted for, like guys like Joe Burrow and Anthony Richardson. There were quite a few quarterbacks, Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, who are now going to be back up into this mix. So how high would Stroud have finished last year? Now, we factor in Stephon Diggs into this passing attack, but we also have to factor in Joe Mixon. Mixon's by far a vast upgrade over Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce. The Texans last year, they were 12th in team pass plays per game. With Mixon and what we believe should be an upgraded defense in year 2 under Miko Ryans, are they going to have to pass as much? And also Stroud, you brought up his low number of touchdowns. He only had 2 games where he passed, I believe, for over 2 touchdowns last year. And then he had another one in the postseason. So, in fantasy, I like CJ Stroud. Really good NFL quarterback, but I need to see it as a fantasy quarterback before I put him anywhere close in my top 5.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. What about this guy, Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville right now? I mean, this is somebody, I know last year people drafted him ADP quarterback 9, finished as a QB 17 on a points per game basis. It was, excuse me, it was hugely disappointing from that standpoint. We didn't get that 3rd-year breakout that we were hoping for. But when I look at Trevor Lawrence, I see a guy who has a lot of reason to hope I mean, you look at some of his metrics last season. The volume was there. It was 8th in pass attempts, 5th in deep ball attempts. So the big plays were trying to be made. They ran the second best pace of play for an offense. He was 9th in both carries and rushing yards with 70 and 339. All the makings of they can get this thing right and start hitting on some of those big plays. I think Trevor Lawrence could shock people. That's why I'm highest on this board actually at 13. And I got a frog in my throat that I can't get rid of, apparently, over it. But I love the weapons of Brian Thomas. I love that they brought in Gabe Davis, and not because I think they're super. I think Brian Thomas could be a superstar, but not because I think they are superstars, but because I think they fit what it clearly was what Jacksonville was trying to do last season. Hopefully, have Christian Kirk back for the whole year. We know you have Evan Ingram. You know, have Travis Etienne. I like how this is mixing up where people are now taking Trevor Lawrence at 15, ADP 15. And I think he is somebody who does still have top 12 potential with a better makeup around him. Anthony, do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree. I like Trevor Lawrence. I was one of those people. I was super high on Jacksonville last year. I bought all in. And for whatever reason, like the defense kind of broke down. The offensive line wasn't great. And it just didn't look like the same offense as we saw under year one under Peterson. Now, you mentioned third year breakout. I kind of give that year one of Trevor Lawrence a mulligan because it was so dysfunctional with Urban Meyer to where I kind of look at this year as his true third year in Doug Peterson's system. So maybe last year was a second year regression, and now we're going to get that third year breakout now that he has stability with Doug Peterson. So that's kind of my outlook, but I like Trevor Lawrence. I don't put too much stock into his contract because they had to pay him. You have to pay him market value because if you don't, somebody else will.
And you're Jacksonville. Let's get it clear here. No one's coming to Jacksonville. This is the best shot you got, 100%. All right. So the Tennessee Titans, they also are trying to figure out if they have a quarterback of the future. Now, I don't think any of us are really drafting Will Levis for fantasy purposes, especially not in one quarterback leagues and even super flex leagues only as a backup only. His ADP is sitting at 28 right now. But there are some in the industry clamoring for the idea that Will Levis could surprise us. I'm not that kind of a subscriber, but Adam, I'd love to get your thoughts.
We'll get into it a little bit later with me, but I am not high on this passing offense, really in the slightest. So, yeah.
It's like, that's it. I just hate you altogether.
I want to be able to speak later when we have that conversation.
That's fair enough. Here's what I'm going to say about Will Levis. I know he had the one good game. And if it wasn't for that one good game, he would not have the supporters that he has, man. Like, everything was dreadful. I mean, talking about 58% completion percentage, 35, ranked 35th in true completion percentage, 35th in pressure completion percentage, 34th in play action, 27th in clean pocket. So when you actually have blocked around you, because everyone brings up, well, the Titans offensive line. Okay, well, when he did have a clean pocket, he sucked then too. I am not a believer in Will Levis. I look at this guy, and I get flack for this all the time. I don't care. He's Zach Mettenberger to me. All right, it's Zach Mettenberger all over again. Big arm, no accuracy, completely wild, 24/7 every time he drops back. And unless those fundamentals take a Josh Allen like unique development, like when Josh Allen went through a quarterback's coach and spent all off season just totally rebuilding his mechanics. Unless Will Levis does that, I don't see this guy long for this league, at least not as a starting quarterback. Anthony, I saw you make a face there. Go ahead.
And I'm going to preface this with that game last year where Will Levis looked good. He didn't really look good. That was all DeAndre Hopkins. Now, we fast forward to this offseason, and my mind completely changed on Will Levis, not so much because of Will Levis, but the organization. They're showing us, okay, we're going to move on from Vrabel. You bring in Callahan. You bring in Callahan's father, one of the best offensive line coaches ever. They spent back-to-back years, top 10 picks to rebuild this offensive line. They spent a lot of money on running backs, wide receivers, and really getting this offense right. They don't want to be a part of this Mike Vrabel, bad offense, let's play ugly football. They want to play pretty football and throw the football. And if you look where Callahan comes from, they were 3 deep at wide receiver. They have that now. Versatile running backs. They have that now. So I am buying into Brian Callahan, and I'm buying into the organization buying into Will Levis. And this is the entire offense is low risk, high reward. If you look at everybody's ADP across the board, right. Low risk, high reward. And more for best ball, I am getting my fair share of Titans offenses in best ball, and I play in a lot of leagues. If you play in volume leagues, this isn't a bad team to have some stock in as I don't want to say backups, but like on your bench. You know, Will Levis is free. Guys like Calvin Ridley, they're your wide receiver 3.
Yeah, look, we're talking best ball leagues. Yeah. That's, to me, that's a completely different conversation. 100%, because you need to take those shots in best ball leagues. Yeah. And again, you don't have to worry about if they flop the 1 week. You don't have to plug them in anyway. You're not worried about if you're starting them anyway. So it's a different story for me with best ball leagues. It's also a different story with the organization. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, the organization did a hell of a job of saying we are going to give our quarterback every opportunity to succeed. This is Will Levis is my take on Will Levis is separate from what the organization did. Your reps brought in the offensive coach, brought in more weapons. They did what the Bears did, and finally the light bulb went off. I'm going to put weapons around you, and at the very least, we're going to figure out if you're the real deal or not. I don't necessarily look at it as we have faith in Will Levis. I look at it more of we're going to find out this year. Are we moving forward with you as our guy, or are we not? I think that's more of the take on it for me from that standpoint.
No, I think that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.